Welcome to Tales from the Bridge. In this episode, James and myself sit down with production designer Dave Blass. If you like Star Trek, this is for you. We definitely talk a little bit about production design and working in television and film, but really, this is a Star Trek episode. Dave is very knowledgeable and very talented. Check the show notes for a link to Dave's website and more information about his work. All right, let's make our way over to the bridge.
Dave Blass is an Emmy-nominated production designer and art director, renowned for his transformative work in film and television. Born in Ashland, Massachusetts, he developed an early passion for storytelling in high school, which led to a scholarship to Emerson College in Boston, where he majored in film production. After moving to LA, Blass honed his craft under legendary filmmaker Roger Corman. He's created everything from sleek sci-fi environments to gritty Western sets, including FX's Justified, which earned him 2 Primetime Emmy nominations, and the honorary title of Kentucky Colonel. Dave received a 3rd Emmy nomination for NBC's Constantine and additional Art Directors Guild nominations for Preacher and The Boys. Dave's passion for Star Trek led him to designing the 2nd and 3rd seasons of Star Trek Picard, where he recreated the iconic Enterprise D bridge, earning acclaim for evolving the franchise's visual language while honoring its history. Based in Santa Clarita, California, Dave Blass continues to push creative boundaries with recent projects including the short film Unification. Dave, welcome to the bridge.
Thank you guys for having me.
We are so delighted to have you, and I feel out of all our guests, we should have one of those bosun's whistles, to welcome you on like they did with Picard or with Kirk in the feature films, because certainly your history and your involvement with the franchise lately has earned you that. So yeah, we're excited.
Well, you can add it in post afterwards.
So yeah, Dave, we'll get to Star Trek, but I am, a little bit curious about your origin story, and I wanted to talk about how you got into production design, and also for the people, for our listeners who may not know, who may just have that general idea, what is a production designer? What does a production designer do on set?
So if you read a script, it kind of varies depending on it, but the Star Trek makes it easy, because if the script says they're on the bridge of the Enterprise, I'm the guy who has to create the bridge of the Enterprise. Or if it says they're on the bridge of the brand new USS Stargazer, I'm the one who has to figure that out. Now, if you then translate that into a modern day show, it's like, okay, you're in a bar or you're in a police station, you're in a thing like that. Most people think, well, you just go to a police station or a bar and shoot the scene. Very seldom is it possible to do that for a long, drawn-out series. The bar ends up going out of business because it's being used as a TV set every day. So you end up, but in that case, just like you would do with Star Trek, you build it on the stage. In fact, I did a TV series called Justified, which was kind of a modern-day Western. And the apartment building where our hero Raylan Givens lived was built in the exact same spot as the Enterprise D at Santa Clarita Studios. So it's the same stage, same thing. You just design something completely different.
So how do you then, as the designer, the production designer, work with the different production departments? There's camera, there's art directors, there's set decorators, there's VFX and makeup. What's your role in that Jenga tower of production?
So I'm basically at the top of a pyramid of creative individuals. And my job is to create a vision and then bring together the individuals and kind of hone their skills to focus it in one direction. So underneath me is the art director and the set decorator, the prop maker, the prop master. And it's working with them to kind of bring apart the thing. The art director will be working with the physical walls and the textures of the building. The set decorator will then come in and bring that room to life. So if it's a Star Trek set, you may have the bridge and you have all the walls and the technology. That's the art director helping create all that space. And then I would work with in the version of Star Trek we had Todd Marks, who's in charge of playback. So he would bring in all the monitors of the screens, the projection materials, so that we would then be able to have screens and graphics and the technology. And then I work with the motion graphics company, and that would be Mike Okuda kind of designing it, working with Twisted Media, who would then animate it. And then they work with Todd to get it onto a screen. And what is a screen? Is it a screen? Is it a curved projection? Is it what is it? And how does that work? That's video playback. Then we get into set decoration. You might want to sit down in a chair. What does that chair look like? And how does it function with all the different things? It could be a sick bay bed. It could be any of the other details. And then if you're in the sick bay, how does someone heal you? Well, they pick up a prop and they would work with it, or an isolinear chip, or all those other details. So we work with the prop master, but all that stuff has many different layers of concept artists and who draw it out, or a set designer who does the blueprint. So massive amount of people, and I'm kind of the one up there. So a lot of people like, do you physically build the sets yourself? I'm like, no, I'm more like the conductor conducting the orchestra. I don't play the instruments. I play the orchestra. And that is kind of what I do. And then in conjunction with that, I'm also interfacing with the other departments, like the lighting designer, the costume designer, the director, all that special effects. If things are going to blow up, how do they blow up? What do we do on that and whatnot? So, and then all that flows through the showrunner or the writers, who are writing new episodes every week and changing new things. So they'll come to you and go, okay, we want to do this. How does the ship do that? Or what is, and then we walk them through how, the technology on that works. So sometimes they bring us the tech and the nuance, or sometimes they come to us and say, here's what we want to do. How do we do it? So it really varies depending on the different types of shows.
Being a bit of a Trekkie yourself, would you say it's more fun to be in the sci-fi realm than it is to be a set director or production designer of modern day settings?
Oh wow, way more fun. I mean, it's like when your bad day is like you're at pandemonium's going on, shit's going south, and you're like, and then you get the walkie rings, and it's like, okay, they need you to set. I'm like, why do they need me to set? Well, Patrick Stewart wants you to explain to him why Sorry and Brandy is important. I'm like, okay, let me go to set. And I'm like, dear Patrick, well, because it was a scene in season 2 where he sees a bottle of Sorry and Brandy, and it's supposed to be an aha moment, but Patrick didn't understand why it was an aha moment seeing this particular bottle, because it was an original TOS version of the Romulan ale bottle. I'm like, allow me to tell you the details. It's starting back in the thing, and then I tell him the whole story of Romulan ale and Sorry and Brandy in this instance. So he picks up the Sorry and Brandy bottle. It's the curved Dunkel's bottle, and so I had to do it. But I'm like, yeah, that's my bad day. So it's like, yes, that's better than going and dealing with trash cans and things, but every show is the same, and every show is different in its own way. So whether it's Star Trek or superheroes, it's every day is unique challenges.
I wanted to rewind a little bit as well too, and go back to Emerson. And I know you went, or from my research, I know you went there for film production. So how did you go from Emerson? And we'll get to him later as well too. But I also wanted to ask if that's where you met Terry Matalas originally as well too.
No, actually, Terry was a couple years younger than I was, but it was because of mutual connections. In my job interview, we both went to Emerson, and he's like, "Oh, did you know so and so?" I'm like, "Oh, I knew so and so," and we started. It was our we shared a film teacher and friends and things like that. So that was a connection. But unfortunately, no, we never interacted at school together. So I bought a one-way plane ticket to go work for George Lucas in Lucasfilm. I was living in Boston. I was like, I want to go work at ILM, and they're like, okay, great, come in and interview. And I'm like, but I live in Boston, and they're like, okay, come in and interview. And I'm like, so you want me to fly to San Francisco to just interview for a job? And they're like, well, we're not going to interview you over the phone. I'm like, okay. So I bought a one-way ticket. I'm like, it's going to work out. Of course it's going to work out. And it didn't work out. And that was a bit of so I spent a year up there trying to get in that door. And then I ended up rerouting, going down to LA, where I started working for Roger Corman. And, he gives you $4 and some duct tape and says, here, build the set. And that's how you learn your craft.
That's incredible. I mean, we can't let the Roger Corman name drop go by without exploring that a little bit. Can you tell us a bit about the first film you worked on with him and how that played out?
I was doing a movie called Asylum with Robert Patrick from Terminator and Malcolm McDowell. And this was actually prior to Malcolm McDowell being in Star Trek. So I'm doing a movie with them, and we had this a giant air shaft that the movie was called Asylum. And there was a giant air shaft where they were supposed to be jumping from one side of another. So picture like a 10 by 10 column that goes up about 3 stories. So I'm standing there painting it. Like I had to paint it like silver and black to make it look like it was made of metal or whatever. And there was a good way to do it. I wasn't doing it the good way. I was doing it the stupid way, which is I was at the bottom with the sprayer spraying up, ideally because I needed a lift to be up the top spraying from the top down. But I was basically trying to darken the lower half of it so it looked like it went down into darkness. So there I am spraying paint up and black paint up. And if anyone's intelligent out there, you know what happens next. Paint goes up, paint comes down. So there I am with goggles covered in paint and whatever. And the producer from Roger Corman comes over and it's like, oh, they were there shooting something. And she's like, oh, I'm looking for the production center. I'm like, that's me. And they're like, no, 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 we're looking for the production center. Who's in charge of? I'm like, that's me. And they're like, you're the production designer. I'm like, yeah, I'm the production designer. What do you want? And they're like, we want someone who's actually gonna get out of the office and go get shit done. So we want to hire you. I'm like, okay. And that's how I got the job.
We actually have talked about a Roger Corman film on the show with Adrian Tchaikovsky. We nerded out over Battle Beyond the Stars.
Oh, okay, yeah. So,
Because
great film.
yeah, I'm a fan. That's probably Corman's one of his best, I would say, and for me at least. And I love the score too. I'm sure I've said this one too many times, but it's a James Horner score, and it's one of his
Mhm.
early scores. So it's a fantastic film. Go check that one out if you have not
Who's
watched
the
it
art
before.
director on that?
Oh, don't ask me the tough ones.
The special effects art director was a little guy by the name of James Cameron. Uh,
Oh, that's
Ah,
and
right.
then and then James Cameron went on to do after that. No, the Galaxy of Terror, I believe, was next. And he had a young set decorator by the name of Bill Paxton working with
Oh
wow.
him
my goodness.
on that film.
And he did
Uh,
Piranha 2 after that, didn't he?
he directed. So Roger. So I had because I directed some projects for Roger too. So I had my lunch with Roger, which is a pivotal thing in the annals of Roger Corman. It's like if you get taken to run to lunch with Roger, that's like a rite of passage. And he told me that James, he knew that James had what it took because they were trying to do this shot, and I believe it was in Galaxy of Terror, and they had some maggots that were on a metal table, and the maggots were supposed to be moving around and whatever, and they were just sitting there not doing shit. And everyone's like, well, they're supposed to be gross and looking like their thing, and they weren't doing it. And James goes and takes a blowtorch, goes underneath underneath the table, heats up the table, and they start wiggling around. And Roger's like, "That's the guy I need." And and again,
Ah,
that's the thing. They need a guy who's gonna take the shit and figure it out. And that was. And then he told me about James doing an entire spaceship out of. He took the clamshells from the McDonald's hamburgers. They used to come in like a clamshell case, and he took them, painted them silver, glued them to the wall, and so that was how he did his sci-fi texture with. So he had fed everyone with the McDonald's hamburgers for like 50 cents for a week, and then that's what they used to texture the walls with. And I'm like, okay, we can do that.
and
So
is that kind of thing still happening? Are you still looking for odds and ends to make a set, or are those days gone?
oh God, no. I mean, yeah, no. I mean, all the time. I mean, especially even in Star Trek Picard, I went back to the material, the grading material that's they used everywhere, and it's freezer pallets. It's pallets that they use in freezers to keep meat and other things. But it's like it works great for lighting and everything, and it was all the rage in the '90s when Next Generation was going on. But people stopped using it because it was like, oh, it's so dated. I'm like, oh, but it's so awesome and it's so Star Trek. So we brought that back in season three of Picard. So when we did spaceship stuff, it looked like. But yeah, you're always looking for the what is the thing that I can put on the wall that's not. It's a lot of drainage stuff is great for that. Because you're looking for something ribbed with texture with something, but pre-made because you can always 3D print stuff. And now everybody's like, oh, but it costs too much money. So you need to have stuff that you can do in large quantities that's cheap as hell. And so it's finding those elements that work like that.
So does that mean you have a garage or a storage locker full of bits and bobs and pieces that you come across?
I used to. I mean, but that unfortunately, that's the old version of Hollywood. We're now in a new thing where I never lived more than 6 months in the same area, and you used to have I used to have that. I used to have a giant warehouse full of stuff, and you just go pull from because now when the show's over, it's like our show's wrapping in June, everything gets thrown away, and you're like, okay, because and then you move on, and even went with Star Trek. There wasn't another. I mean, that was the advantage of the '90s and Paramount is that all the Star Trek stuff didn't get thrown away. You do stuff for Next Generation, throw it in the warehouse, and then you'd pull it out later on. But then when Voyager came along, Deep Space Nine came along, they just would always all go to the same warehouse and pull more stuff. So you can see that Bib or Bob go from this show to this show to this show. And it just, but now, when we did Picard, we didn't have that warehouse. So everything had to be custom made from scratch. And it's a lot harder to do that. And it's that thing of like, you look at the Excelsior, when we first see that, it had the command consoles from the command consoles from Next Generation. And, they had the ability to do that. It's like, that stuff was there. The TOS movies used the Next Generation transporter room. So everyone you're able to pull from one to another and just reuse stuff. The corridors would, from the motion picture were reused in Next Generation. So, but, and they have that going a little bit up in Toronto with Discovery and Strange New Worlds. And you see things pop up from Discovery that were in Strange New Worlds. But, I haven't seen anything from obviously the Starfleet Academy yet, but I'm sure that you'll be seeing a lot of Discovery stuff show up in there.
In a general way, I mean, you've sort of answered a bit of that question too. I wanted to ask about that idea of production designing, and you touched on it with Tristan's question as well too, for something like Star Trek. We'll get into specifics about Picard and unification as well too, but taking that project on, and especially being a fan, you had, it's no surprise to anybody to say you had a lot of baggage in a good way. I mean, to deal with in terms of established looks and artifacts and IP. And so how did you approach that when you came onto Picard?
Well, my approach was actually different from what they had been doing. Because if you look at season one of Picard, it doesn't look anything like Next Generation. It doesn't look at anything. It is more similar to Discovery than it is to Next Generation, and that was by design. Is that they felt that Next Generation was dated. It was not what audiences wanted. They want modern. They want sleek. They want shiny floors. They want gloss. They want this is what they want. And they're kind of leaning, and also the JJ verse. So they wanted a combination of Discovery meets the JJ verse, and was like, okay, and that's really what season one was. Because if you really clock season one, there's no Federation starship. You have the Zheng He shows up at the end, and that was a bit of a thing because it wasn't really a planned thing. It was just kind of ended up happening. And that whole bridge was just the Discovery bridge, just redressed, because Jonathan Frakes was up there shooting. He was directing Discovery, so they're like, "Oh, just throw the jacket on and go sit in the bridge in the captain's chair, and we'll do that. And we'll change the background a little bit." But there really was no LCARS. There was no, it's like the La Serena is just kind of like it's a Star Trek version of the Millennium Falcon, and that's really what it what the plan was. It's like, oh, it's a it's like it's a freighter, and Rios is kind of like a rogue guy driving the freighter. I'm like, really? The rogue freighter guy? Okay, great. No,
Where
and
have I heard that before?
uh, and then at one point there was he had like a co-pilot who was like this giant spider that was living in the ship, and it was like a whole thing. But that was before my time. I just you hear rumors and you're going through the hard drives and you find stuff and you're like, wait, what? Uh, so when I took it over to season two, there wasn't going to be a Stargazer. They were going back in time. They were taking the La Serena back in time, and then that was all that thing. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh no, no, we want a starship. And I'm like, okay, that's gonna. And then it was like, oh, the starship will carry over into season three because we were doing them back to back. And they're like, then the ship will be the hero thing for season three. And then, spoiler, that didn't happen. So the Stargazer turned into the Titan, but because we were shooting back to back, we didn't actually have any time. I mean, we finished shooting season two on a Friday, started season three on a Monday, so there was no time to even repaint the Stargazer or change it. So it literally became. But I'm also smart enough and been around enough in the Star Trek universe to go, oh, so let's employ that bridge module idea that everyone's been talking about for forever. It's like if it works for the Miranda class, it will work here in reverse. So instead of the Miranda class having a different bridge module for all these different ships, it's like no, the Stargazer and the Titan share a bridge module because of the destruction of the ship Planitia shipyards that are just making one bridge module these days, and it's just crank them out. And that was also an idea that I shared regarding the Zheng He. I said, okay, maybe we got to like backstory it a little bit. Why did why do they have 100 of the same ship? It's like, well, because some admiral got it up his butt that it's like, oh, if we make 100 of the same ships rather than making them all different, we can make more faster, and then we can protect the fleet. And that was what that plan was. And then deep into the trenches of the Borg, running around Chateau Picard in the basement. At the same time, we're designing the new Titan. So it's like it was all going on at the same time, trying to figure out how season three is going to how season two is going to wrap up, and then how do we start season three. And that was even before Terry dropped the bomb, like, oh, by the way, we need the Enterprise D. But you have to roll with it, and that's really the thing is that in television, the difference between television and film is in a film you're designing for what's on the script, and in TV you're designing for what might happen. It's like I always call it the extra door philosophy. It's like I always put an extra door on one of my sets because you never know. Oh, I need a in the police station you need a bathroom, you need a filing room, you need the room that they're going to go in and do the thing later on in the season, and you don't know what that is, but you got to get there. Or it's like, oh, it's another office for the guy who comes in and has to work for it's like, what is the thing? But it's like you got to be designing for what could possibly happen. So whenever and you got to roll with it. It's like when Terry says, okay, we need this and we got to do the Enterprise, it's like, okay, I still have to, I have a budget. It's not one of these things where there's no limits. It's like, okay, so what do we do? Where do we take from? And he's like, well, the Shrike's just a view screen, so it's just we'll do that. It's just because we'll just it'll be like this close up on Vatic and whatever, and then all of a sudden Amanda Plummer comes in and drops her amazing performance. And he's like, well, maybe we need a whole bridge, and I'm like, dude, I don't have enough room. Where am I going to put it? And he goes, figure it out. That's why we're paying you the money. And then I'm crying. I'm like, I got to go find some place to cry that I'm out of the way of everyone. No one see me. And the only place I could do that was downstairs in La Serena, because we never used it. And I'm like, we never use it. And then that's how we ended up converting that into the Shrike.
Ah, very nice, very nice. Reduce, reuse, recycle.
Exactly.
So, yeah, season three, if I had to pick one word to describe it, from all points of view, would be ambitious. Because it did, looking at it from purely, a production standpoint and a location standpoint, I'm sure there's more, but just from memory, there was Chateau Picard, there was La Serena, there was the Daystrom Station, the Fleet Museum, the Titan, the Shrike, and of course, the Enterprise D. I mean, maybe that crying room was put to more use than you'd care to
Yeah,
admit.
then District 6 was massive. That was an entire town that needed to be created. And then the Borg stuff, and so yeah, it was insane to do that all at once. Yeah, it's just every episode was just like more, 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 and you're like, okay, well, what can you do, and how could you do it? And the great thing was Terry would roll with it, and he's like, okay, well, this is what I want. What can you give me? And it's like, okay, well, I know you want this, but this, and so it's like the great one was Daystrom, and it was supposed to be this labyrinth of going down corridors, coming around and going around here, like wandering through this thing and seeing all these treasures. And I'm like, dude, I've got one corner. I can give you a couple side doors and they'll come in. And we just blocked it. So it looks like, they come around and go to the left, and they come around and go to the right. And we would change the signage and do some things, but it's TV. And that's the thing. Star Trek fans know that. They're used to that. They're used to, wait, it's the same cave we've been in 12 times before. It's the same thing. And, it's like sick bay only has 4 beds because we never really get anyone sick. But everyone gets, it's fine. And that's the thing. They forgive you that. What they don't forgive you is not adhering to the spirit of the rules. And it's like, that's why, things like our transporter room looks like a transporter room. I'm like, why don't we just do the thing where it's like, it doesn't look dated? Yes. It looks dated to Star Trek era. So it's like, if we just admit that that's what a transporter room looks like, we don't have to spend a ton of money on it. We don't have to make it like shiny, jumping around, spinning around, whatever. It's a transporter room. And the same thing for sick bay. And we just kind of embrace that idea.
It does seem like audiences these days have become way more forgiving in some things and way more critical of others. It doesn't need to look brand new because we'd rather have the nostalgia maybe, or at least just see something familiar.
Well, the way I expressed it to Terry, I said it's not nostalgia, it's continuity of design. And I think that one of the many things that the Star Wars universe has done well is, especially, the interesting thing about the Star Wars universe is it hasn't really expanded on. It's like you got the new JJ ones. They take place what 30 years later than the originals, but the technology doesn't change at all. If you think about, a technological evolution of where we were when the original Star Wars came out to where we are now, but the Empire and the Rebellion, they're still looking at their little, tactical displays that look like they're from the 1970s, version. Whereas Star Trek has to kind of play with reality. And it's like the Star Wars tech and all that stuff has stayed the same for 40 years. Star Trek keeps wanting to evolve and become something different. So we ran into this in season 2 because we were supposed to have a scene in young Picard's bedroom. And I said, okay, well, let's have the discussion. So if we're in young Picard's bedroom, he would have the computer that Kirk had on the bridge of his Enterprise, which is that little thing that kind of looks like an original Mac.
Mm-hmm. I remember
Yeah.
that.
And with the little slide-in chips and everything like that. I'm like, does that make any sense? Yes, it makes Star Trek sense. But in our real world, it doesn't make sense because what kid would have that in 400 years?
Yeah.
So you run into that whole, issue of like, well, is it Trek continuity or our continuity? And then how do you you wrangle all that? And we danced around it, but we haven't really embraced it. It's like, how do you get around the whole idea that when the Botany Bay was supposed to be launched, and okay, the Botany Bay and the World War, and then it's, like, okay, what do you want to do here? And no one really wants to take it on because it's creating a, and it's like I would say the best example of it is in Enterprise, what they did, the Klingon augmentation virus. Like, how do you explain this version of Klingons and this version of Klingons? It's like, okay, we're going to write this, wonderful explanation that makes a version of sense and then go with it. But then, of course, then Discovery comes along and throws that out the thing, and even Discovery has had to walk it back. By the time we get to Strange New Worlds, the Klingons are back to looking like Klingons. How amazing is that? Without any explanation whatsoever. So it's hard. I mean, it's because you're dealing with an IP that's been around for what 50 years. So it's challenging.
Well, and it's not just an IP that's been around, but it's an IP that is also not just beloved, but it is truly a part of people's lives. I remember the Denise Crosby documentary from a number of years back, Trekkies, or I believe it was called, and the dentist who has a Star Trek themed office and dresses in his Starfleet uniform. So, this is something that people have incorporated, right? There's fans, and then there's the passionate, the truly passionate, and is that something that was in your mind as you were working on this?
Oh, always, and also, the other thing was part of the part of the great thing about Discovery is that they learned from the fans, and they had several seasons to do that, so they realized it's like, oh, okay, they started out and going, oh, we're going to do something new, and then everyone's like, whoa, 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 why the Klingons don't look like Klingon? And they're like, no, we're doing the JJ thing, we're doing something new, and they're like, no, JJ did a time warp thing, which is why it's all new. You didn't do
Yeah.
that. You're just out there doing your thing, and it's like, and then they're like, oh shit, we got to course correct. But when I took over on Star Trek, it was like, well, this is how we do Star Trek, and it was Discovery, because that by then they'd been in what 4 seasons of Discovery, and so that was kind of like coming into the Berman era of Star Trek. It's like this is how we do Star Trek, and that's why Voyager looks like it looks, because it was taking over from Next Generation, and it's like, oh, okay, so that was kind of our marching order, which is why it's all shiny floors and glossy. It's like, well, it wants to look like Discovery, and all the producers and the writers and directors were coming from Discovery, and they're like, well, this is what Star Trek is. I'm like, no, no, no. There's a whole nother Star Trek out there, that. And they're like, yeah, that's so dated. I go, but what if it wasn't so dated? What if we could update it and blend the two together? And that's where we got season 3. And it wasn't possible to completely go a different direction. I mean, it's like there wasn't a world in which we put carpet on the floors of that, because it just wasn't going to happen. And also, we didn't have the course correction time. We never had the audience feedback time from season 2 to make changes, because when season 2 came out, we had already shot season 3. So, the floors are shiny, it's too dark, it's whatever. It's like, well, that sucks, because we already shot season 3. Hope you like it. But it was also funny because, all the stuff about the carpet, we had already shot the joke at the end of season 3, which is, Picard going, I miss the carpet. And we're like, we all miss the carpet. That's the joke, folks. But you couldn't tell that joke for basically 2 years. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. And that's, what a phenomenal perspective to know that all of that was in the can and just waiting to be let out when, people were reacting. And hearing that too, that sort of back and forth, and how it's funny how, what can seem like institutional knowledge evolves itself too, and then someone like yourself and others come along and have to remind that, oh, there is this other way. And, I'm of a certain vintage, clearly, and I, grew up sort of straddling, clearly with Kirk and his crew, and it was the movies that were my real bag, but I also loved TNG. And when I saw things like, the phasers that had returned to more of like a pistol form, from the next gen, non firearm looking state, to the Neo Constitution class, the other big character, the ship, and the Titan, which was a gorgeous design, but clearly reminiscent of, the refit and Enterprise. Were there heated and lengthy debates about those kind of things, of how much was too much, and how, as you said before, what's nostalgia and what is the right way to play this?
Heated debates, absolutely not. I mean, it's like Terry Metalis, I can't think of a moment when there was even like got lukewarm with him. He just had he knew what he wanted. He had a vision. Did like when he showed me what he wanted for the Neo Constitution class, he's like, "What do you think?" I go, "It's a bold idea." I don't, but also we were 7 weeks out from shooting, so
Wow.
I'm like, "Is this what you want?" He goes, "Yes." I go, I went and sat down with Doug Drexler. We banged it out in about 4 hours. Like, he's like, take the Stargazer nacelles, put that on because use the idea that they're using the same technology because of the whatever. And we banged it out and sent it back. And he goes, "Yeah, that's great. I love that." And I go, "Yeah, when you say I love that, are you good?" And he goes, "Yeah, no, I'm good." Because we had worked on the Stargazer for 6 months. We worked on the Titan for 6 hours.
Wow.
So it's like, okay, and go. And that was, and so then Doug Drexler took it from our quick little sketches to a full 3D model. But at that point, we needed it for all the graphics on the bridge and all the stuff. So everything had to be switched over. It wasn't so much about the visual effects that would come later, but it was like all the graphics, all the playback and everything, which became so integral to the design of the bridge. All that needed to get redone in a very short amount of time. So Terry was like, "No, I'm good." He knew what he wanted, and then from there we had to then, go back and retcon, the thing because there was the whole plot point of Shaw and the Titan and and then it was okay, how do we deal with the Luna class and this and that, and so then he's like, "Dude, go nerd that shit." Get out, nerd that shit. I don't want to. He's like, you and your team figure that stuff out. I got bigger fish to fry. So then we went and figured out how Shaw would work and the nacelles would work and how oh, it's the Luna class and this is why, and we created this whole backstory for it to make sense. So that Terry shouldn't have to worry about that. It's like, let us nerds figure out how that works, and he would come and he'd be like, "How does this work?" Or Todd Stashwick would come down and he's like, "Okay, show me how to work this thing. What do I do? Got to plug together." And so everyone just did their things and really came together to make it work.
I do want to touch as well more on the D and the building of the bridge, which I know is a big part of this story because I think it's the payoff that no one really thought, no one expected, and no one thought would be possible. Perhaps including the crew as well, the production crew. But I also know from doing a bit of research that you involved a lot of, previous crew and designers, people like Mike Okuda. And I know, I'd heard the story about you bringing Herman Zimmerman on the set as well, too. But I'm curious, as you resurrected that set and brought that back to life so carefully and lovingly, which was obvious, uh, was there anything, what were your takeaways from that? Were there any craft lessons or things that you learned or discovered in doing that?
No, I mean, well, the main thing was that I made, again, going back to the thing, I don't, play the instrument, I play the orchestra. I had to pick a soloist to do that set, and picking Liz was the best decision I ever made because she got it. She got what I was going for. She got the attention to detail, and she took the reins on that because I'm playing she's playing that one song and I'm playing the whole album. I have the Borg ship going on. I have Daystrom. I have all this other stuff going on, the Titan, and so she was perfect for that task. But it was just the idea of redesigning something because whenever we design something, it's kind of it evolves and you make a decision for whatever reason. It's like, oh, we're going to cut down some pool noodles and that's going to be our thing here. It's like, well, because it's the 1980s and it's cheap and that's what we're going to do. It's a cheap sci-fi show. um Obviously, now we can't do that and everything, but my biggest thing was, good God, how is it that after all this stuff and how expensive this stuff is, that there weren't literally pieces of the set that had been saved, or a bible of paint colors and things, and nothing existed.
Nothing.
So nothing. I mean, we we went into the archives of Paramount and they had, of the 26 pages of the blueprints, I think they had like 10 hand drawn blueprints of what the D was. And but luckily, I had a bunch of kleptomaniacs that worked for me, one of which was Doug Drexler, and Doug had a full set of the Enterprise blueprints in his garage, so we didn't have to start from scratch. But and then also you have to then go back and track, well, what changed from season to season to season, and which season are we going to do, and why, and all that detail. And the set had moved stages and changed shape, and things had fallen apart. So it was just a matter of so one of the first things I did when I took over Star Trek in season 2 was I reached out to this guy Yerk on Twitter. It spells Jorg, Jorg. And because I knew from following Star Trek Twitter, he is my worst nightmare. He is the guy that is going to make my life miserable, because he's going to point out every single thing that I've gotten wrong, that I do wrong. So why not?
And we know this fan base will do that, right?
And we know it. So I said, why not flip the script and empower him, bring him on, and then it's his job to make sure I don't do things wrong. And so that was so he was our kind of our guru. So he got with Liz, and they went through and frame capped everything. They took the blueprints, and as the set was being built, they would go, okay, oh no, it's got to be a little bit more of this, that, or whatever. And we looked at colors. It's like, and Yerk would go, oh, there's a shot in episode blah, 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 where there's an ensign laying on the ground. So if we can color match the uniform, because we have the uniforms, we could look at the uniform, and put that next to the carpet. So we could go, okay, here's this red and here's this red. We could match that. And then you could see, in this episode, there's a close up of this part of the horseshoe and whatnot. So we kind of went beat by beat by beat. So.
Incredible. Incredible. That's why you're called professionals. I'm curious as well too, and this is where I'm gonna really show my stripes here, and but I think I'm among friends, so I'm gonna do it. But this is my original copy. I don't know how old it is now, but I still have the tech manual. Did sort of consumer products well. Then there's this one too, which is even older, I think. I got it at a con many years ago, these Excelsior blueprints.
Ooh, I don't have that one.
No, yeah, I don't even. There's not even because I love the Excelsior class. I got to admit, I'm a sucker for that and the refit. But how much, if any, did products like that play in your
Oh God,
reference?
yeah. I have I actually I sold my copy that I had, and it was marked up and whatever. But yeah, no, I mean, I had 4 copies of that on my desk, and it's like that was it would be incredibly valuable, except we had Michael Kuda there as well.
Ah,
So
amazing.
you're like, and then an email away is Rick Sternbach, and even Andy Probert would help. I mean, there wasn't anyone in the Star Trek family who did not welcome my phone call. I called, the prop guys had when it came out, the Worf had a new weapon. One of our concept artists and the prop guys started drawing up something, and I looked at him. I'm like, it's cool. Did you think to call Dan Curry? He designed the bafflet, and they're like, why would we call Dan Curry? I'm like, well, it's going to solve your problem. And he goes, what problem? I go, if you design a new weapon and the fans hate it, it's your fault. If Dan Curry designs a new weapon and the fans hate it, Dan Curry designed it, but they won't hate it because Dan Curry designed it, and it will be good. Also, if you design a weapon and Michael Dorn hates it, it's your problem. If Dan Curry designs a weapon, he and Michael Dorn are friends. They've been doing martial arts together. Michael Dorn won't hate it. So I think we called Dan Curry and we solved this, and then that solves all your problems. And Dan was like, "Oh my God, that'd be so great! I just want to do this." And he came in and he did it, I tell people, I said the only reason I hired him so I can get him to come in and sign my book. I mean, it's just it's just. But that was the thing where we would reach out to. I mean, I still had I was so bummed out. I had my copy of the Klingon dictionary, and I went up
Oh
to
yeah.
I went up to talk to Michael Dorn with it, and he's like, dude, don't just.
Yeah.
He's like, no. But even that, I was able to reach out to Mark Orkran and get some translations. We needed something for the District 6, and I wanted to do something. And I'm sitting there going, I literally can pick up the phone and call anyone in the Star Trek universe, and they will return my phone call. It was insane, but it was just, and then to have Herman and come out and whatnot. So, we're blessed.
Going back in time, time travel is a trope of sci-fi and Star Trek, and I can only imagine that for them, for the cast, walking back on the set once completed must have been a bit like time travel. And for you, that must have been a bit of the sort of litmus test of if you'd done you and your crew, Liz and the rest of the crew had done your job as best you could. Can you tell me a bit? I know you've spoken about this before, but I gotta ask about that moment of the cast walking back on the bridge of the D.
Yeah, a friend of mine had been prop master on the show Curb Your Enthusiasm, and they did a season where they did a Seinfeld reunion, and they recreated the sets from Seinfeld. And he said there was a really odd moment when the cast came in and they sat in the diner set, and they all just kind of sat there and like froze for a moment, and they were like supposed to be rehearsing, and they all started crying because they realized it's like we're back, and they reflected on how much that place and the show and everything had changed them and given to them, and they all started kind of like bawling, and everyone was on set started crying because they realized that's what it was. And I wanted to do that for these individuals that had given so much to me and so many other people. So that was really our goal with this set, was to not just recreate it, but recreate it down to the minutia so you couldn't tell, and so that when they walked back on it, they felt like they were home. And it's like when the day came, I think there was the cast came on, the full cast came on. Terry was there. I mean, there must have been maybe like 10 other people on the bridge, and just to be myself and Liz to be some of those people, and to have that moment in your brain. And Todd Marks, our video playback guy, was there. He captured it all, and it's just, you look at it and you're like, oh my God, what a moment to be there, and to see that, and Gates and Marina and everyone, and tearing up. And the first thing, because that LeVar did, was he went up to his station and he pulled out his little chair, which was hilarious because we weren't going to do the chairs. And Liz and I were like, no, we got to do this chair. Even though there's no scene where they pulled the chairs out and it was a waste of money to do, we're like, we got to do the chairs. And it's like, and that was the first thing he pulled out, and whatnot. So it was just amazing to do there. And again, there was, for such uh, a short amount of time, it was pretty special.
Dave, just sort of offside, do you have a few minutes to talk about unification a little more?
Yeah, sure.
I remember back in the day, and not to make any sort of parallel whatsoever, but do you remember back in the late 90s, there was a new phenomenon that came out called Troops, a fan film made for Star Wars. Do you remember this? No? It was like the mashup between Cops and Star Wars. Remember the old TV series Cops? And you probably still find it online. And that was the first time I'd ever seen that. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it sparked the whole fan film phenomenon. And when I heard about unification, I sort of assumed it was a similar kind of fan filmy kind of thing. And then I watched it just a little while ago, and we talked about it on the show recently as well too. Um, it's so much more. It's a weird hybrid between, if I can be so bold, between a fan film, because I think everyone involved with it probably were fans, but also incredibly invested and professional, and it's something like we hadn't seen before. How did you get hooked up with the Unification project?
The unification project came through the Roddenberry Foundation, and I had been working with them in Otoy, and then it basically it adapted. They've been doing these short films and going all the way back to the rescuing of the Enterprise D off of Meridian 3. Yeah, that they kind of tied into that. So it's one of those things that kind of played over it. And then as I said, working with the Otoy folks, and then like, okay, we're continuing this idea of telling Star Trek stories in between the gaps of history. So, and whatnot. So they're not really dealing in the TNG era or whatever. They're just kind of telling these little short stories of history. So.
And there's some deep cuts in that film. Some very deep story and canon history nuggets. What was your research like going into that, and what was important for you to include, thinking about the storyline?
Mainly, it was just the whole idea of Spock and his, kind of bringing history together of all these Vulcan things that had been going on. Basically, the idea that his whole culture had been destroyed, and what what can he have saved from Vulcan, and that was his space, and we got into that whole thing. So, I mean, the whole idea of the whole virtual people and all that stuff, that was more technology and actors, and we talked for days about that. But for me, it was creating the spaces that felt like this was an area where Spock had gone through, the galaxy, finding archives and elements of his culture and bringing them together so that he could be the caretaker of the Vulcan world.
Well, and certainly, not so much an Easter egg, but I think, and I've heard you say this before in other interviews as well too, that more than an Easter egg, it was a bit of world building. On his table beside him was that infinite diversity and infinite combinations medallion. Is stuff like that as a fan, second nature to you, or where did that sort of depth of symbolism come in for you?
Oh no! I mean, again, that was another situation where I got together with Yerk and we went through, we created a Bible of the history of the Vulcan iconography and what was used where, what was used in Spock's quarters, what was used anywhere, and we pulled every element. And again, it goes back to the world where, in the 90s they had one prop house, and you'd make a Vulcan shield or something, and then it would go back to the prop house and sit there until you did another Vulcan scene. You went and grabbed it, and then you made two new things, and then those things would all go back. So by the time you went to the fifth or sixth time you went there, there's a whole room full of Vulcan props, and you knew what it was, and you could just pull, and you would just keep making new things, or you make more of something. So we just kind of went through and found all those pieces, and it's like, well, what is important, and whether it be the Vulcan lute that Spock plays, or the bells, and the Amok Time, episode, and just kind of went through and then what did we see more than once, so that we could kind of clock that that's kind of an important thing. So, but again, these aren't Easter eggs. This is like, what is Vulcan culture? What is, if you're going to write in a Vulcan language, we know what it is. That's not an Easter egg. It's like, that's what the language is. And I think Tolkien did that very well, which is you establish the language and the world building. And then, when you go to that race of people, you immediately know that the elves are more, Art Nouveau, and, Vulcans are, the Klingons are more brutalist, whereas the Vulcans are, so it's the whole idea of just maintaining the continuity of design, and not, just coming up, let's do something new for the sake of being new. And I think that that's mainly what we're trying to do, is realize that there is a history, and that this stuff has been created. And again, I think that is a good example of Peter Jackson. It's like, when you watch the Lord of the Rings movies, everything looked the way it looked like, because they went and hired Alan Lee, who had been drawing the stuff for decades and doing calendars and things like that. So when we all went to the movies and saw it, it's like, well, that looks like what we imagine it should look like, and Gandalf looks how we should look like, because we've seen the drawings and things for years, and he just made it look like what. So with Star Trek, I tried to do that. It's like, make it look the way, make Star Trek look like Star Trek.
Well, Dave, we have really enjoyed this chat, and there's so much more to talk about. I wanted to talk about your photography, your music photography, and your travel photography, but hopefully we'll get a chance to do this another time.
Well, drag me back on. So, well, thank you guys for taking the time and having me on, and for all your support for Star Trek as a whole. It means the world to me.
Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Dave, for joining us. That was a great conversation. I'm a bit of a Star Trek nerd, but I mean, that made me want to get way more into Star Trek. So we hope you enjoyed this one. Lots more to come from Tales from the Bridge. We hope to see you soon. Until next time.